sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that wants to hear your voice loud and proud. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host with the big mouth tonight is, of course, Bianca. Joining us again is Texas queer counselor Billie Beard, here to lend her voice to our conversation on safe vocal feminization and the pitfalls of passing in a heteronormative culture. Billie, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Christy and V. Really glad to be back here. It's a little weird because last time I was in the studio and now I don't get to interact with you and your wonderful crew.
For sure, it
At
is
least not in
our
person,
loss.
anyway.
And
so I'm not sure what all we need to do as far as with.
Oh, sorry about that. I was muted to
ahead.
keep the
I'm sorry, I cut in and out a little bit.
We're having a little bit of tech issues tonight.
Consummate professionals. How are you doing, V?
Oh my God, I'm doing good. I think I'm lagging just a little bit, so if I'm a little off sync, apologies there. You guys, we're going to have a really good show tonight. I'm super excited about this episode because this is a topic that I've thought a lot about, and I am super down to start learning some background and some techniques I think we're going to dive into as well. So if you're interested in what we're going to be talking about today, which is transgender voice therapy, you can call the show at 512-991-9242 or call tiny.cc/callsex. Use your computer for that, toll free across the board, no matter where you are. Also, a quick reminder that today is the last day to submit your mailbag episode question that we're going to be pre-recording this Saturday. So be sure to send your emails to sex@atheist-community.org if you want to be included in that.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. Billie, before we get into like the what or the how, let's look at why. Why do some trans folks go through voice therapy?
The short answer is just trying to get comfortable and be safe in and around the world, honestly. Let's face it, I mean, in an ideal situation, you'd be able to, no matter how deep or high pitch your voice was, nobody would think anything of it, and you'd just be able to accept what their gender is right out of the gate. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're increasingly seeking to live in a world where a particular height or look or, how husky or masculine or soft or feminine your voice isn't bound to or critical to a particular gender. So why does this kind of thing matter? Why are people looking to change these pieces of themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that there's our voice you kind of have an image whenever you hear your voice. And if you're a trans man, you have this, you've heard your voice pre-testosterone for so long, and it kind of just links together with that gender dysphoria on your body. And then if you're a trans woman, it's like you hear this and you just hear this guy and it's just constantly in your head, and you want to kind of allow yourself to be able to step away from that situation and be able to kind of go down a different path, a different way of being seen through the world.
Sure. Well, what is the difference, I guess, between like avoiding gender dysphoria and just trying to pass, or is there one? Does that difference even matter?
Let's see here. I think they're tied together. I'm not the biggest fan of the term passing. I tend to, but also then it's like, what kind of word can you really use to describe it when it's just like, I guess blending is about as close as I can get, because passing implies like failure. Like, okay, if somebody can pass, somebody can fail, but if you can kind of blend into society where it's like, okay, there's variation, there's a little bit more of a kind of a ebb and flow of what that could look like. So I tend to go with more of kind of blending in as far as that's concerned. But I also don't want it to be construed with as conform to either, which I think a lot of people would kind of go with the blending.
Yeah, no, I like that distinction, that, this idea that people have the right to want to fit in, but that it's not a pass or fail test. There's not a expectation or an obligation to do so. So we've talked about
Absolutely.
we've talked about binding on the show, on how chest binding can be really affirming for trans men and for some NB folks, and that there are some dangers to it. There's a lot of that same kind of concerns mixed up around, like, why should we have to change our bodies or whatever to fit into society, while also wanting to make space for people to look and feel like their natural selves. Does that feel like a fair corollary here?
Yeah, I think the good thing is with voice, it's not the damage risk is not as severe as improper binding. The good thing is that if you push your voice too much, you can usually rest it and allow it to heal. You can learn new techniques to kind of allow your voice to not be pushed so hard. There's different ways of kind of allowing that. If you did happen to push it too hard, that you can typically recover. While I know with binding, if you're using like ace bandages, it can actually cause you to suffocate. And so, I mean, there's a lot, or cause bone damage as well. So, I mean, it's a little bit less severe, but there is some risk of, if you overexert your voice, you can cause polyps and growths that will come in that can actually change your voice, and typically will make it kind of can make it sound deeper. Think of like these nodules, or if you've ever interacted with smokes like 2 or 3 packs a day for like 20 years, and you hear that voice, that's what those nodule voices will give you, this real deep, raspy kind of voice. And I don't think anybody really wants that kind of coming out of them, whether as male or female, or somewhere in between.
Well, so it sounds like there are some risks to vocal feminization, which I guess we can demystify or declinicalize that term a little bit by just describing it as a person who is seeking to maybe raise or soften their voice to make it appear more feminine.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there are some risks to doing that, but maybe with effective coaching and training, there are ways to avoid that or mitigate that. Do I have it right at all?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, it's the same thing with singers. Like singers that abuse their voice or don't treat their voice well can have real kind of vocal cord problems. So there was I remember seeing on, I can't even remember where, but it was, I don't know if you're familiar with Henry Rollins on Black Flag.
Sure.
He had to go to an ENT specialist because he had messed up his voice so bad. And this particular doctor worked primarily with vocalists and singers. And he ended up saying that it was the second worst vocal cords he's ever seen in his entire life, because he had abused his voice so much over the years. And he was like, and basically the doctor was surprised, like, what do you mean you don't drink? What do you mean you don't do drugs? Because it was just so terrible, where it was just like, it was inflamed, it was red, there was nodules all over the place. It just looked awful from everything that it was ever described of.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds very West
like,
Coast punk, but not necessarily like the healthiest and happiest way of existing.
Exactly. So I mean, it's not just trans people that experience this problem. There's a lot of people that use their voice incorrectly. Cheerleaders do it. Drill instructors abuse their voice too much. So it's not just for trans people, it's also cis people too.
Well, it seems to me like a lot of these conversations around the different things that trans people do in order to make themselves feel more like themselves, none of it is unique necessarily to trans people. And yet there's this stigma around pursuing things in any category if you are trans. So like I went to a vocal coach before I came out, even to myself, because I was like, I don't really like my voice. I want to change it. I want to adjust it. And I didn't have any kind of gender ties to that. If I went to somebody who was specializing in that for trans people, I think that would be met very differently than, oh, you know, V just wants to be more professional in the way that they talk. And the same with, you know, any kind of you know, body surgeries or hormones or binding, like they are all things that everybody does for various reasons, and it's pathologized only in certain circumstances, which feels weird to me.
No, that's fair. If you applied like the WPATH standards for top surgery, for instance, to any like cishet woman that wanted to pursue breast augmentation or reduction or whatever else, it'd be an entirely different conversation. And I think that's really worthwhile to highlight here.
And I guess I had another question for you, Billie, about the
Absolutely. I think. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead. With a little bit of a lag.
I'm sorry. Oh, that lag is getting me. No, you go ahead.
All right. So what I was going to ask is a little bit of clarification about kind of what you bring to the table in terms of voice coaching, and if there is a very specific kind of person you would look for this, or is anybody who specializes in voice coaching also qualified to do this? Or is this a subsection that people would need to look specifically for if they wanted it?
Yeah, I think ideally you would want a speech pathologist that specializes with working with trans people. There's even, because most of the time it focuses on vocal feminization, but then there's also some that there's also some trans men that are on it too, just to kind of help get their voice a little bit lower, or kind of follow the speech patterns a bit closer to the typical male in whichever culture they happen to live in as well. And ideally, that's what I would say is, but the problem is, I know for a lot of trans people, that's just not an option because of financial restrictions.
Sure. Yeah, it's really worth noting that this is not something that's going to be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, and just with the nature of health insurance and really healthcare in this country, it's not something a lot of folks have access to. So I definitely want to get into it with you about what some of the perhaps DIY solutions look like, and maybe what some of the dangers and things to be aware of there are. But before we do, I'd love for V to pull up a caller for us. V, who are you looking at?
Yeah, we've got some interesting calls today. So let's talk first with Turquoise. I love that. In Michigan, I believe. Turquoise,
hello.
welcome.
Hi, I actually just ran into your show this week, and I noticed there was a caller that named themselves Purple, so I guess I'll try to start a trend of people calling in with color names. So
I like that a lot.
Love it.
Great. So I wanted to call because forgive me, I didn't realize there was like a pre-chosen topic of some of the things that some binary trans people have to do with to try to blend in with around here. So I guess,
no worries. We get calls about all topics.
Yeah, no, we'd love to hear what's on your mind.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I have trouble understanding the concept of non-binary genders, and it's because basically the way I grew up is that gender was just a synonym for sex, biological sex, and basically I was always taught, and I always believed that it doesn't matter what your genotype or your phenotype is. You just shouldn't have to be bound to any sort of gender roles or you shouldn't be told what you're supposed to be interested in, or what your personality should be, those sorts of things. And then also when I learned about binary trans people, it didn't really bother me at all. I didn't see any problem with it. And I'm not implying that I necessarily see a problem with non-binary, like identifying as non-binary. I just don't understand, because I feel like it kind of goes against the idea of that that if there is does this mean that there is now, like, if we have to say that there are more than two genders, does that mean that we now have to prescribe what is considered feminine and masculine instead of just saying that you shouldn't put a label on yourself, or you shouldn't try to put yourself into a box?
Right. Yeah.
You used the word prescribe. I know V's going to come after you. Go for it.
No, I'm not that scary, I promise. No, so I think you've hit on a couple of really interesting points, and I want to just reassure you right off the bat. Non-binary gender is newer in the mainstream. Not, historically there have always been non-binary people, but in the mainstream it is a newer conversation. So it makes sense that there's a little bit more confusion and hesitation around that, especially because as humans we like boxes, right? We like to be able to put people into their box and understand where they go. And if someone wants to be in box A, like, okay, that makes sense. We can put them into box A. That's fine. But what about when they take the boxes away? What happens then? And at the risk of being very almost, what's the word? At the risk of being too simplistic about this, I would say reductionist, I suppose. I would say, think about ice cream. Right? For a very long time, imagine you grew up in a world where you only thought that chocolate and vanilla were the only flavors of ice cream. And sometimes you preferred one or the other, right? Maybe you only liked chocolate, or you only liked vanilla, or your whole family liked chocolate and you liked vanilla, or, and there's some tension there of, which one do you like and which one should you like and which one, all of that. But there's still like this contained either or situation, which makes it a little bit easier to have that conversation. Now imagine you go to a 31 flavors and suddenly you've got like pumpkin, cheesecake, caramel, coconut, and you're like, what is happening? I didn't know that these were flavor options. This is overwhelming. And yeah, it can be a little bit, but it's still ice cream, right? And there are people who prefer, pumpkin, cheesecake, caramel, coconut instead of chocolate or vanilla. And that doesn't mean that chocolate and vanilla are somehow less important, or that they don't exist, or that people who choose chocolate or vanilla are somehow less valid. It just means that we realize there are more options. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go at this from some sort of ontological from an ontological point of view, or an epistemological point of view, because I guess it's like feel like that's the same, because I'm a cisgendered girl, and the thing is, I always just consider myself, well, I'm a girl, but I've never felt any sort of gender dysphoria or gender euphoria. I've never felt anything where I could feel like I don't identify as a girl or a woman. So, but at the same time, it's like, I don't sometimes I'm femme, but other times I am, but like, basically I do not, not only do I not, not only do I feel that I align with a lot of what people say a girl should act, but it also really depends on the environment too. Like right now I'm in Michigan, and the town that I'm in it's a lot more. It doesn't really seem to care as much as where I grew up in Texas.
Right.
So I guess it's like not only, so I guess it's, I feel what I'm trying to figure out is like what standard do I go by?
Right, exactly. Oh, good.
Yeah. What is gender? How do we measure it? How do we weigh it? What is the expectations that come along with it? Yeah.
If it's different in Michigan than Texas, how do you know? I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to remember that we are social creatures, that it is baked into our DNA. It is part of our evolutionary history to be interacting with one another. And that idea of the looking glass self, that we are not just who we say we are, but to a certain extent or in a way, who other people see us as. And that's an important part of our identity. And that can become really oppressive. And we can talk all day about how being a woman doesn't mean that you have to abide by certain expectations and different things. But gender is really multifactorial, and it's not just about what other people tell us we should be. There is this very squishy, very difficult to define aspect of how we experience the world that we tend to clump together into this idea called gender, which is really, if anything, just a conglomeration of statistical data points. I mean, it really is just women tend to like this, and this. You may or may not give a shit about this, or this, but if you identify as a woman, you're more likely to line up with a lot of those points. And when you say, I am a woman, that's kind of what you're expressing. And the number of components that go into that is baffling and infinite, really, as we infinitely continue to create more and more experiences for people to interact with.
Okay, so I guess my question is how do we know for sure that there are indeed more? How do I know for sure? I should say, like, there are more than two genders, as opposed to gender should just be a synonym for sex, and we just have a lot of we just have a different trends in personality traits and likes and dislikes and trends and this and this and this. That
because it's a made-up human word.
Now we're getting into prescriptive versus descriptive.
Yeah, there it is. There it is.
That's exactly what I was wondering, because
exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, so Christy kind of hit the nail on the head. This is all made up, right? The word sex is made up. The word gender is made up. We agree that it's this is what it means for the purposes of conversation, for the purposes of research, for the purpose of history. We have agreements on what words mean, but those change over time, right? Like the word gay used to mean happy. And when people said, I'm gay, we're like, oh, congratulations. And now people say I'm gay, and people say congratulations for an entirely different reason. But we change the way words are used. And so what we're doing, in addition to challenging the notion that everyone needs to fit in one box or another, we're kind of saying, what do we call these boxes, right? So it's a social movement, but it also is a linguistic one. And the reason it's coming to the fore as much as it is because the internet has connected us and allowed us to adapt our language so quickly that it is causing a little bit of this, wait, what does this word mean? Wait, how are you using this? I just learned some really amazing acronyms the other day, TMA and TME, and I want to do an entire episode about it. But I had never heard of this before, and it turns out there are new words and new phrases that we're learning all the time. And for us, we're saying gender fits this category of things, and we're going to make a concerted effort to shift that definition. You're not behind. You're not working with wrong information when you say they're synonyms. They have been for a long time. What we're saying is we don't need two words for one thing, because we're realizing we are more complex than that. And so we're taking one of these words and we're rehabilitating it. We're using it in a different way, and we're encouraging people to come alongside that. Now, we can argue about whether it's better to do that or invent an entirely new word, but that presents its own issues when trying to get it to catch on. So yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack here, but the takeaway is words are made up, all of them, your name, my name, Christy's name, Billie's name, like everything is made up. And if enough of us agree that we can move in a direction that positively affects us, then we can change that.
Yeah, and I want to make some space for Billie to weigh in here in just a moment, but I want to point out that human beings do this all the time. This is just part of being a human. There's no such thing as the United States of America. There is no such thing as having bipolar disorder. Like, that's not anything specific or tangible that you can really point to that is this. But it's a descriptor that we use to describe a conglomeration of ideas. When we talk about somebody as having bipolar disorder, what we're really saying is they have a cluster of symptoms that statistically tend to go together. And when we lump all of these different symptoms into one particular box or into one particular person, it's useful to describe it with this term or with this idea. And gender works in the same way. I want to be mindful not to connect a disorder to the idea of gender, but also just to say that anytime you've gotten a medical or psychological diagnosis, we're taking all of the components that you as a human exist as, and then trying to come up with a cute little label that we can describe it with. And that's exactly what we're doing in these other ways.
I think I also want to kind of jump in as like as far as like a language shift. I can't remember exactly when. I think it was before the Norman Conquest 66, but the word girl used to mean just child, and boy meant servant, and then eventually this ended up shifting over to where boy meant boy, child. And it's like it's just like child, child, and then girl just meant the female child, because you would have, and the way they used to distinguish between boy and girl was like girl, and there's like knave girl, if I remember correctly, was boy. Like it's kind of weird, like everyone a little bit different. Like I'm trying to remember exactly, but there So it 1,000 years ago, everybody on this panel would have been a girl when they were a child. So
I like
it's kind of funny, but anyway.
Dropping some linguistics on V. I love the tongue. Thank you, Billie.
All right, Turquoise, how does that strike you? What are you thinking?
I guess I'm I'm definitely gonna have to just listen over this call again, because I feel like there's a lot to take in, and there's just and I remember I'm not really sure if all my questions, if my questions are answered, but there was a lot of things explained here. The reason I decided to call was because I used to say that people were just making up genders, and I'm trying to figure out and I think I'm just trying to because I've always respected people's pronouns, and I'm just concerned with, it's kind of like what Matt Delani says, I want to believe as many true things and as least false things as possible. So I really want to be respectful of other people's identities, and at the same time, I just want to understand all of this.
For sure, and we did drop a whole lot of stuff on you, right?
Yeah.
all the way. We introduced linguistics
Yeah.
and philosophy and all of these things into the conversation. So definitely give it a listen back and call back with any other thoughts you might have after listening to it. And maybe, hey, I didn't get this, or I disagree with this element. I do want to just make sure we are touching on this, and then we'll let you go because I could talk about this all day. We are also making a descriptive claim, if that makes sense. So I know a lot of the time people are like, well, you don't believe God exists, but you believe that trans people exist. And why is that different? And the difference there is I can tell you that non-binary people exist because, hi, I exist and I'm a non-binary person. And therefore, non-binary people exist because it's a description of what I am. I'm not saying that non-binary as a concept exists as like its own entity out in space, that I'm tapping into. It's just a description of what I am. So yes, I love the instinct to go ask those questions, figure out the root of all of this and the scientific background. But I also want to make sure that we're differentiating between making a claim about how I describe myself and how enough people have described themselves to be like, yeah, this is a thing, versus making a claim about an ontological existent being outside of our realm of understanding.
Okay, that last part definitely clears some things up.
Oh, good. Wonderful. We got there. All right. Well, thank you so much for calling in, Turquoise. If you do have more questions, if you call back, I'd love to talk to you again.
Okay, that's great. Can I just ask one more question before I hang up?
Sure. Why not? Go for it.
What is TMA and TMI?
Oh, TMA and TME. Yes. I did drop that and then just left it. TMA is transmisogyny affected and TME is transmisogyny exempt. And so there's this idea that there is a very specific kind of misogyny that is targeted at trans women and cis men who present, or non-binary people who present in a feminine way, that does not affect people who were assigned female at birth and then transition into a more masc identity. So I'm super excited to dive into that, but I do not have nearly enough information to weigh in on it at the moment.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you so much. Thank you very much. It was great. It was great talking to y'all.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that moment when Turquoise was like, well, it sounds like people are making up genders. That's it. That's the whole call in one little morsel. They are. And there are 7 billion people on the planet, each one making up their own gender. But then we take all of those things that they make up and we start looking for the trend lines. We start looking for the through lines and the useful things to say that help describe and help clump and maybe order that data set a little bit.
Right. And I feel bad that we kind of led her around in this like really big circle. But when you call in and ask, please explain non-binary, at that point, there are multiple areas to attack, right? There are multiple ways to go at it. And a lot of people have different questions. And that one was a really good one. I think when we got down to it, how do you know that this exists? It exists because we say so, because that's what words are.
Because that's what words are.
That's what's words.
Well, V, you think we can take another?
Sure. Let's talk to Sky in Colorado. The Colorado Sky. Hello, Sky. Welcome.
Hi. Hi. How are y'all doing today?
Doing great. Thanks so much. What's on your mind?
Good.
Hi. So I know you all grew up religious, or at least from what I've heard. And I grew up pretty religious, and not only that, I was homeschooled. So, and I also lived in a small town, so I really wasn't exposed to very much. So as I grew older and started realizing, I started questioning my beliefs about being in the God claim and stuff, I started to realize how much inner like homophobia and transphobia I had and how many biases I had. And I've started really trying to work on changing my views and how I first think about things over the last year or so. And I've discovered this show, and it's really, really been very helpful for me because I didn't, growing up sheltered, I didn't realize that transgender people were a thing until like I was 16 or 17.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I only knew that non-binary was a thing until like a couple months ago. Like, I am so far behind in like knowing that there are more things out there than just male and female or boy and girl or whatever. So I was just wondering if you all had any suggestions to help me kind of on my way to be like more respectful as I'm learning and like how to become more exposed to this. So yeah, and how to dismantle those kind of phobias and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to just point out at the start that the big things stay the same unless we make little changes. You know, it's not about going into yourself and giving yourself like a belief-ectomy where you can just rip out some of these homophobic beliefs and things. The truth is, you start small and you do a poor job of it, and then you do a slightly better job and then a slightly better job. It's about kind of constantly and in a piecemeal fashion identifying these things and doing what you can, doing what you need to make those little changes. What did some of those changes look like for y'all? What is the next step maybe?
Yeah, I think there's just so much to explore. I mean, I grew up Southern Baptist, so there's definitely these big, all the misogyny and everything else. But then it's like, why would I want to transition to female if there's so much, misogyny within the church? And I was still religious at the time, and just kind of processing. I think there's just so many things you do as far as just of re-examining and allowing yourself to just explore and try to read, talk to as many people as possible, talk to as many different people as possible was really helpful for me in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having those interactions with and experiences with folks that exemplify these things that you were taught to hate so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, the idea, and this is something I've been on for a while, this idea that somehow we think we have an idea of what's right or good that is accurate, and that how we feel indicates whether or not that thing is good or bad objectively. And that's something that I know my Christian upbringing really ingrained in me, which was this idea that, if something makes me uncomfortable or something makes me feel defensive or icky, that is the Holy Spirit telling me that it's wrong and bad. And it took a little bit of dismantling, even after I no longer believed in a supernatural power. It did take a little while for me to shift my thinking from I feel this way, therefore it is this way, into, oh, this is making me uncomfortable for some reason, and I don't know why. Let me sit in this discomfort for a little bit and really dig into it and think about it logically and see if there's a reason for it. And more often than not, that discomfort was the result of some kind of underlying bigotry or phobia that I had not actually thought about yet. And so it's just a constant process of noticing when you feel uncomfortable about something and then not running away from that discomfort, not taking yourself out of the situation, unless you're, of course, unsafe. But instead sitting with it and saying, hey, why am I feeling this way? And is there a rational reason for it? Because if there's not, I'll bet you anything, it's just a leftover belief kind of rattling around in there that just needs to be put to bed.
Yeah, and that's definitely where I've been coming from, is like I've noticed like specifically my dad is very transphobic, and I didn't realize that until a few months ago when I was like, oh, okay, so the icky feeling that I feel isn't really how I think. It's just what I feel, not what I think. And differentiating those two things has been really hard for me. I guess.
Yeah,
Oh,
long-term viewers of the
I-
show
Mhm.
will have heard this before, but the metaphor I like to use is the idea of like an open heart surgery. If we were going to apply some sort of like moral standard or like good place point system to the idea of a heart transplant, I think we would all agree that it's amazing that these like stupid monkeys in fancy surgical masks have figured out a way to take a human heart and put it into a different human's body. That's remarkable. If I had to sit and watch like video footage of that for a couple of hours, I'd probably pass out. Like I get syncope from looking at blood. It grosses me out. That is my body's reaction. It's not necessarily, though, a good indication of what is true, what is
Mhm.
just, what is kind, and what is right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad to hear that you're asking these questions and that you're taking these steps. I'll say that a lot of my walking away from religion and walking away from the homophobia and honestly the internalized and even self-directed homophobia that came with
Mhm.
that came through film. It came through not just interacting and meeting actual queer folks in the real world, but through understanding and viewing their stories through podcasts, through books, through movies, and these different kinds of
Mhm.
things. And I think that educating yourself on queer culture can be a really beautiful way of gently, ever so slowly cutting away at some of these issues and some of these uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
And you're already doing that by watching this show. So
Most
thanks
of
for
them.
joining us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Like, over like the course of the last few months, I've realized that I'm bisexual, and I've been starting to question my own gender, because of listening to these things
Mhm.
and exposing myself to like TV shows and like this podcast, for example, and being like, okay, this really isn't something to be afraid of. This isn't something that's inherently bad. Let's just sit with the feeling for a minute, and then we'll come back and see, like, okay, this feels right, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. And
Mhm.
yeah, honestly, at this point, like if you're starting to play around with these ideas and you're starting to realize things about yourself, I would say make sure that you're just being honest and being relaxed about it, I guess. Like when I first
Mm.
started, I was like very
Mhm.
uptight and like nervous and like I need to find the answer now, and oh no, my whole life is going to change, and if I say I am this thing, then I'm stuck as this thing forever, and I have to commit to it. And really, I think everyone should question their gender and then come to a reasonable conclusion and be like, no, actually I am cis. That's cool. All right, cool. You had that conversation with yourself and that's where you landed. That's great. If you question it and you're like, oh, actually,
Yeah.
I'm something else, then equally awesome, right? But just the fact that you're having those conversations with yourself and being open with yourself and hopefully understanding as you build this new identity for yourself, give us a call. Like as you start playing around with these ideas, if you have questions, if you come up against anything you want to talk about, we'd love to hear back from you.
Cool. Thank you guys so much. This has been really helpful for me to be able to talk about this with other people.
Good.
Hey, glad to hear it. Thanks so
I'm
much for
glad.
calling.
Bye.
Fantastic.
Thank you. You all have.
Bye.
Take care. Via, I love what you said about the unexamined life and about the importance of just kind of doing your own gender test. I
Mhm.
mean, the reality is most of the folks watching this are going to be cis, and that's fine and beautiful and wonderful and valid and nothing at all to apologize for. But if you were just handed this cis identity at birth and you haven't taken a moment to investigate it, how do you know?
Exactly.
Mhm.
Well, Billy, you mentioned speech pathologist and some of these other professionals, but I guess I'm curious, what are some of the options for voice therapy?
So it winds up being that, so like a speech pathologist that specializes in, it's probably going to largely be identities. For you might be able to do some remote stuff. One of the other things that I'm seeing a lot of is also singing teachers, singing coaches, things like that. A lot of the techniques that are used by speech pathologists are also used by singing teachers as well, to kind of work through. The good thing is those can be really helpful because if you don't have any pathology as far as any kind of like vocal problem, like maybe you have a paralyzed vocal fold or some other kind of situation where you would require a specialist, but you have perfectly everything's working perfectly fine as far as your vocal cords are, then a singing coach can also be really helpful as far as getting that practical skill of being able to reach those higher notes. And singing is very similar to reaching those that higher frequency and the higher pitch for speaking.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about vocal surgery and what some of these other treatment plans might look like?
Yeah, so surgery is interesting. So you went ahead, and the current one that's, if we're talking about like raising the pitch, it's Wendler glottoplasty. So, and what they do is, the good thing, they don't have to do an incision, but they go through your nose to get down into your vocal cords. And what they do is they first use a laser, and it's the about the front third of that is cut, and then they they'll add in a couple of stitches to be able to seal that actually connect, so then thereby shortening. Just to keep in mind that the length of the vocal cords are very, very small, even in men. People that have vocal folds are probably about 3/4 of an inch to a full inch. And for anybody that doesn't use the stupid imperial thing, the centimeters would be 1.75 centimeters to 2.5 centimeters for typical cis male or trans women. And then for cis women or trans men before testosterone, it works out to be about 1.25 centimeters to 1.75 centimeters, so about half an inch to 3/4 of an inch in size. So it's very, very delicate, and it's a specialty. So that would be one of the big ones as far as vocal. The thing that winds up being the difficult part is you have to do vocal rest for 15 days. That means no talking at all. So you will be using a whiteboard to be able to communicate. But the old method, when they used the knife to make the cut instead of a laser, the recovery time was 30 days without speaking. Jeez. So it definitely takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're talking about. No, it sounds like we're talking about incredibly invasive and precise kind of work. I mean, operating on something that is 2 centimeters long. Are there risks to the surgery or any of these other treatments that we've been talking about?
Well, let's see here. The good thing is risks are pretty low. What can happen is if the folds don't seal off right, you could have kind of a little bit of a gap, so it'll kind of give you a breathy sound in your voice, or can kind of other ones where it doesn't completely heal, so it kind of makes kind of this kind of rough sound, where there'll be kind of like, you'll have essentially 2 pitches going, where you'll have like your pitch, but then also kind of a lower pitch happening at the same time if it isn't completely sealed properly. So then they would have to come back in and stitch that little part up again. But that, I mean, it's pretty minor as far as like this. There's you'll still have a voice. You may not like the result of that, of how the pitch raising goes, but that it's you're going to have you will be working with a speech pathologist for a while to go on ahead and kind of make sure that those vocal folds are the part that was stitched together are closely, and that they're symmetrical, because if they're not symmetrical, then they may also have to do some surgery as well. So there's some minor issues that can come up. And then also the risk factors, there's certain, once you get up to a certain age, they don't want to do surgery. So typically, once you hit around 60, they're not going to want to do that kind of surgery anyway.
Yeah, so it all sounds like kind of a lot. Stepping away from vocal surgery, are there any risks to just kind of DIYing these things? Picking up YouTube videos or whatever else to try and explore your own voice or your own range?
Yeah, I think the risks are there. They're relatively minimal. I think the important thing is, if your voice hurts doing the exercises, then either you may not be doing the exercises right, or they may not be good exercises to do in the first place. So you'd want to stop, just so you don't damage it further, and just kind of allow yourself to recover. I think that's really the key thing. If it hurts, then not good. You need to stop if it's hurting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. That feels like useful advice to hold on to.
I'm curious about... Sorry, I'm going to jump in here real quick.
Please.
I know there are quite a few message boards, especially on places like Reddit, where they have I actually follow, I believe it's called r/trans voice or something. And it's very much about individuals rating each other's voices and giving feedback and ideas for, how you could, get it to the pitch you want, to the cadence you want. I'm curious what your thoughts are about, participating in that kind of a community effort.
I think if it can be done constructively, when you said Reddit, I was thinking, are they going to say oh, that your voice sounds terrible and be really judgmental? So that's what immediately came to my mind, but I'm hoping that if it's supportive, then I could see it as a benefit. I think that's going to be the big thing, because I think we tend to focus on pitch a lot, but there are a lot of different things that do to affect, like your rhythm, your intonation, your pitch variation, your melody, and your voice. There's a lot of different things that wind up happening as well, and also just of the brightness of the vowels you're producing. So typically, like I said, this is based on Western European standards of voice and everything else. So typically the pitch for women tends to go up and down a lot more. The volume stays about the same, and the syllables get a little bit elongated. And like males, typically it's more of the changes in the volume and not really the pitch. And so it's one of those things that kind of goes into those factors of kind of learning how to speak differently. Vowel production for women tends to be a bit more, the vowels tend to be more fronted. So basically, you have different vowels. So there's back, so towards your throat, and then fronted vowels towards your mouth. And so typically women tend to have it fronted, so then it will get you that brighter sound. So like I said, there's these little subtle things, and then that's where it's really good to have somebody to be able to listen to you and kind of go okay, does that sound right or not? And I know it's also not a bad idea if you don't have somebody to work with to have some way of recording, so you can kind of see where you are and okay, well, what does that sound like? And kind of getting used to hearing the voice. It can be very triggering for a lot of people. So I know that's not exactly the most exciting thing to think about, is recording your voice while you're in the process of getting it to where you want it to go. So I'll disclose, as for me, I had a really deep voice. So it was really, really, really deep. So that took a lot of work, and it was a lot of effort and time to be able to do that.
Yeah, I hear that. V, I don't know about you, but just doing this show and having my voice recorded so often, the thought of trans folks watching this, wanting to like work on and change their voice and recording it and listening to it back, I guess I just want to say to everybody listening, your voice is beautiful. Your voice is okay. We're excited and proud for you. If you want to make some changes to the way you present, we're totally here cheering you on. But please, please, please don't stress it.
Yeah.
This is a journey. There's not a place to end up
Also, everybody
Mhm.
hates their voice when they hear it back too. Like it took me 3 months of being on the air to watch something back and not just like be cringing the whole time because it was terrible. So we get you.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you asked us each
Absolutely.
to have a straw handy, and I'm a little bit curious as to why. But before we get into that exercise, I'd like to take one more phone call if we can.
For sure.
Sure.
Let's talk to Dani. Dani has a question, I think, based on Billie, your comment about the concept of passing. So welcome, Dani. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how is everyone tonight?
Doing good. Doing good. Excited to talk to you. What can we help you with?
Yeah.
So I kind of have this internal conflict relating to passing because there are a lot of things that I personally do and seek to do and set goals for myself. Working on my voice is one of them, and the way that I present myself is very intentional. And I guess I'm trying to reconcile that with my understanding of like how horrible concepts of passing can be and how transphobic they are within themselves. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I as far as with the idea of passing, because there's such a negative. If you don't fall into this very strict idea of what a woman is, then you're not trans enough, or you're not good enough, or you're not passing enough. And it's just, and then it winds up being like, okay, but the only way to consider passing to some people is to be really feminine. But then if you do that, then another group of people are going like, well, see, that just proves how fake it is, being so hyper feminine. And I think, and then it just brings back a lot of different things that came from like the way the 80s was like, in order to get hormones for a lot of trans women, you had to say, oh, I'm only attracted to men. It may not be true, but you're attracted to men. You had to wear a dress. God forbid, if you came in with a pair of jeans, then you're not real enough. Go back and come back in a few months, and we'll talk about it later. So just the real horrible things. Had another person I talked to that said their therapist wouldn't sign them a letter for surgery until they sold their Jeep because women don't drive Jeeps. And it was a man that was her therapist, and he's like, well, I don't want to go through another 6 months of therapy so I can get my surgery, so I'll just sell my Jeep so I can get my surgery that I want. And it's just some really ridiculous things. So that's always the thing that I always, and the thing that always, exactly, and the thing that's why I have such a negative view as far as the term passing, because it's very much like every single time that I hear it, it's usually a cis man telling me that I need to be this woman to be a woman.
Mm-hmm.
That always yeah, but yeah, it's always going to be kind of that negative part of me whenever I hear that term passing. It brings up a lot of really negative connotations for me.
So how does all that strike you, Dani?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the word that I'm used to using. Another word was introduced tonight. That was interesting. I'm wondering if you could expand on what is meant by that or intended by that term. But I think it was like blending.
Mm-hmm. Blending versus passing. Yeah. Billy, can you kind of lay that out for us more?
So for me, so for me, blending is, it's not necessarily like, what does it mean to be female, like, female, like pass fail kind of thing. Blending is like, oh, I see this person as female. I like to think of it as not necessarily like conforming, but if I decided to cut my hair and have a pink mohawk and I walk into the grocery store, what I'm hoping is that people, if they're saying anything about my pink mohawk, they're going like, hey, look at that woman with that pink mohawk. It's like, that's real weird. That's cool. What the hell's wrong with that person? But at least it's then how I'm presenting. It's not, oh, but at the very least, I'm still seen as a woman, and that's why I see it as blending. Yeah, so I mean, at least at the very basic level, like, you see me as a woman, but you may not like how I present my womanness.
Mm-hmm.
How does that sit with you, Dani?
If that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't interrupting with the lag and everything.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that is, I think in a lot of ways that mirrors to certain things that I do. Like at one point in my journey, I discovered that wigs made me feel amazing because I could wear kind of whatever clothes I wanted to, and people misgendered me in public a lot less. I guess like what the root of like the question and like this call kind of comes from, I think sometimes I feel guilty for wanting those things for myself, for like trying to subscribe to these things that when I'm in public or when someone hears me on the phone or whatever it is, they assume the correct gender. And like yeah.
Yeah, because I think that but the thing is like, for that is it's allowing you to be seen for who you are, and I think that's and the key thing is you say you like that, you like the way you feel when you wear the way you like the way you feel when you wear those clothes, and that's the important thing. If you're doing it just to fit in, then that may be some stuff that you may want to talk about. But the fact is that you like these things, and it gives you the added benefit that, people also respect your gender. I think that's fantastic.
That's the crucial point here. Is this idea serving you? Does it feel good? Do you like it? Or is it a rule that you are expected to follow? Is it a rule that you are oppressed for not following?
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you giving us a call, Dani, and I hope that this, is at least a little bit illuminating, but more than that, I hope that it's supportive. Just knowing that there are folks, folks watching right now, folks in the chat, folks who helped to make this show, folks who are part of this show, that are just wanting to be nothing but a support to you as you are existing in a society that makes it very confusing and confounding to be yourself. And we, hope to have some answers and some insights, but more than anything, I just really appreciate your bravery in calling the show and kind of raising these issues and just allowing good atheist people to come around you and offer whatever sort of support or advice we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks for calling in, Dani. Have a lovely rest of your night.
You too. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dani.
Take care.
All right. So we've got a couple more callers on the line that we will hopefully get to. But I know that we have this fun technique thing that I've been super excited about all night. So we want to get to that.
Okay. So what it is it's a straw technique. So it's used by SOPs, singing instructors are using a lot now. And it's just to kind of, the idea is basically sometimes we push our voice too much and we're pushing too much air and we're causing our vocal folds just like really just kind of get slammed by just too much air hitting them. So the idea is to kind of so the straw restricts the airflow. So it prevents that from getting to its full where it's just hitting too hard. So it really allows and then also it kind of loosens up and shows the tightness. So the idea is to get from here on your throat to where it's actually much more like teeth in the forehead, in the ears, where it's kind of vibrating. So the resonance chamber of your voice is your mouth, your nasal cavity, and also a part of your throat as well. But we're trying to do most of the work in our mouth and where we actually have the most control. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on outside. So what you want to kind of do is put the straw in your mouth and just nice and loose. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
our vocal engineer loves that we're doing
kind of
this.
go.
Keep going.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I'm sure he'll love the sound. So the idea is to kind of do kind of sound. So
So just trying to,
just
I guess,
that
feel
just really
that or
great
experience
it's
that
awesome.
like in the skull more than like in the throat or in the neck.
Yeah, that's the idea, is to get it up into the skull, whether in the jaw or the ears. You can kind of feel that vibration. So that's the idea. So one of the things you can do is kind of go. So you get that higher pitch.
Okay, I'm going to try this.
And that kind of helps. Yeah. Yeah, it's silly. And like I said, and that's why normally you want to do these exercises alone, because you will be ridiculous, but it's fun.
Or on a first date, whatever works for you.
Exactly.
I have no shame. What are you
Let me play the song of my people.
Oh.
Perfect. Okay. Well,
and then you can also do it with different songs if you want to. One SLP did, you can do the national anthem, because there's a lot of highs and lows and everything else, and then it just kind of feels ridiculous too. So whenever I do the national anthem, I also salute. So it just makes it. Because it just feels ridiculous, so you might as well
Really,
keep
you're
it
officially my
on.
favorite guest ever.
all right. Well, I can't believe it took me this long of doing secular sexuality before ever having to like perform with a straw in my mouth. Let's go ahead and grab just a few more calls if we can before we wrap up for tonight.
Sounds good to me, Christy. Let's talk to Chelsea in Texas. Chelsea, welcome to the show. How can we help you tonight?
Thanks. So I actually have basically the same question as Turquoise, just from the totally opposite side. I'm a non-binary person living in Texas, wondering how to explain to cisgender women that I interact with on a regular basis, both at work and in friendships, how my gender identity is different from gender equality, where no one judges them for liking whatever they like. So I feel like Turquoise and I need to talk.
Yeah, I mean, this is that other side of the coin, right? This is the other component here, which is,
And I guess,
yeah, when we're talking about gender roles and gender presentation and gender expectations, there are prescribed rules that society has kind of designated that we kind of either can choose to follow in weird, quirky ways, which is how some non-binary people approach it. And then there are other people who kind of reject the idea altogether, which is how other non-binary people approach it. And certainly there is a blend of that in the middle as well. So I think instead of getting down into like the linguistic or sociopolitical aspects of it, I would say, well, why does anything have to be gendered, right? Why is any role gendered? And my approach to this whole concept, and this is very much informed by my being non-binary as opposed to a binary trans person. So this is very much my own experience. I kind of want to throw a wrench in the whole thing and say, okay, well, why did we agree that women can't drive Jeeps, and why would you assume that was a gendered thing at all? And why can't we all just be who we want to be? And that inherently is a very non-binary concept that a lot of binary people, cis and trans, buy into, right? There is a concept of moving towards a less gendered society as we start realizing that we're all complex human beings who like a variety of things and have access to pursue whatever those things might be. So I think instead of trying to challenge the idea of gender roles as something to uphold alongside gender identity, it might be interesting to play around with the idea that maybe gender roles can go away a little bit, and what is left is just identity. And we talk about it in terms of gender because that's how we understand things, and that's the word we've chosen. But it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive.
I like the descriptive thing. I actually was like scribbling down notes furiously when you were talking to Turquoise. But the situation that led me to this question specifically is actually, I think, kind of an attempt at allyship. So my boss is a cisgender woman, but and she knows I'm non-binary, but hadn't really fully ventured into the they, them pronouns yet. And I still haven't fully outside of the internet because, Texas. But she has put on, so we work for a California tech company, and they went through this thing earlier last year sometime about putting your pronouns on your email signature and stuff. And in an attempt to normalize gender neutral pronouns, my cisgender woman boss put they, them on her email signature. She doesn't go by it in everyday conversation. She, again, totally fine with gendered pronouns being referred to her, but she has this on her email signature as an attempt at allyship. But what it's actually doing is making me feel like I can't start using those pronouns because she's kind of, rather than normalizing them, what she's normalized is you don't have to respect them.
Yeah, pronouns don't matter.
I don't know if well, yeah, but I
Oof. I mean, like, kudos to her for trying. Like, that is an awesome, I think her heart's in the right place there. But it does feel very much like we're in that stage of I don't see color. Right.
Right. Yeah. Color blindness. That was the first thing.
Yeah. Like, oh, well, it doesn't matter to me as long as you do this, 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 and this, right? As long as you don't defy too many stereotypes, as long as you conform to cultural norms, as long as, you do all these things, then I don't see color, then I don't worry about it, then we can all be happy. And it's when we start saying, no, it's not okay to be homogenous. The goal is not to make everyone the same. The goal is to celebrate that diversity and focus on what makes us different, and lift that up. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the place we need to get to with this conversation. I think we're stuck in the 1960s version of it, which is that colorblind, everybody can be homogenous if they try really hard, yay, kind of mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to agree. That's one thing that bothers me when. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I
go ahead.
Went over on you. Go ahead.
No,
you go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just, I am interested in hearing what you're about to say, but I'm also don't even know if I should broach the subject, because it would kind of be out of the blue, because she's had that on her email signature for a year now. But I'm only just now comfortable with the idea of gender neutral pronouns, because, for some people it's a process. And for me, it's been 5 years in the making, and so, yeah, it's just, I don't know if I should even say anything, or if I should just do my thing and not worry about it or whatever. But what were you going to say about?
Oh, I was just going to kind of agree with the annoyance of whenever we're doing saying what our pronouns are, and somebody says, well, I don't care. And it's just yeah, you do. I know you care which pronouns people use, because it just feels like it's dismissive. And at least for me, it always felt dismissive whenever people did that.
Yeah, there's still so much.
She said, because I asked her about it when she first did it, and she said that she would rather people get it wrong with her than with someone else. But then what she's done is allow everybody to get it wrong.
Yeah, right. Because if you're not going to hold that line and say, no, these are the pronouns, you should use them, then you're normalizing using the wrong ones. I fully agree with you there.
Right.
I think I can understand the hesitation there. I am misgendered constantly at work, and I'm also very hesitant to, barge into the middle of a meeting and go, excuse me, actually. So I get the discomfort with the professional, business element there. If you feel comfortable with your boss enough to say, hey, I noticed I've noticed you put they, them in your email signature. I actually have been working on this for 5 years and really doing some really thoughtful work. And I think I'm ready to put them in my email signature, if that's the direction you want to go, and say, I really appreciate what you're doing. Can we work together to make sure that these pronouns are being used when they are required? Because it's really important to me that I am called by my correct pronouns. So instead of calling her out on it, instead express how important they are to you, and maybe encourage her to be more vocal. And hopefully that will maintain that goodwill that she has, because there's this other side, right? Which is, if you're too demanding, then that goodwill goes away, right? You can only expect allyship as long as you're polite and respectful and ask for it nicely. Otherwise, it is rescinded. And that by itself is a whole topic. But if you're worried about maybe stepping over that line right now, I would say that might be an interesting way to go, and just speak with I statements, right? and say, hey, this is what my pronouns mean to me. I've done a lot of thinking about this. And I want your allyship in making sure that they are used correctly for me. And then just focusing on that might be a good first step there.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that this conversation, should you choose to have it, is a choice. And I would encourage you to remember that there are other people that will likely benefit from your decision to speak up and to try to educate and everything else, but you don't owe those people anything. You should have this conversation if you feel safe having it, and if you feel like there will be a benefit to yourself or to others for having it. You are not obligated to get into an argument with your boss. You don't owe it to anybody to lose your job over this. If you are able to, I guess, further the cause and just create a more just and educated world, then please, we have your support. I think V gave some really great advice on how to go about that. But please know that you don't need to be on the front lines. You don't need to be the tip of the spear if you don't feel able or equipped to do that.
Yeah, no, my boss is actually extremely, because she's a woman who's made it through to pass, through being an engineer, through senior engineering into management, right? And well, I think the reason I haven't had any issues with my career is because being in the middle, I have an easier time talking to men. But so she's, where I'm going is she's very, very into the inclusion and making sure there's diversity and stuff. And I genuinely think she means well with this. It's like she just missed the mark a little bit, like good intentions for execution. But,
yeah.
No, so this
well said.
Good, yeah. And so no, that's a good point about rather than calling her out, just make it about how important it is to me and stuff. So that's a good point. I also appreciate the statement about how I don't have to be on the front lines and stuff, because I do feel as an engineering type personality, I feel the need to justify and fully explain and have scientifically laid out reasons for everything. And then when people don't understand, I do feel a lot of pressure to make them understand. But so I appreciate that affirmation, I guess.
For sure. And as you continue to have these conversations, if you have this talk with your boss, I'm actually very curious about how that shakes out. If you decide this is a conversation you want to have, give us an update.
Okay, will do. All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Chelsea.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, V, do you think we have time to fit in one more before we talk about some of these resources and point people on where to go next?
I think we've got about 5 minutes for Bill and PA.
Great.
Bill, welcome to the show. How can we help you today?
Hi. Several years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I was actually in an atheist meetup. And one of the people, typically we had 8 to 12 people, and just casually, this guy who, nobody would have picked him out in a crowd or anything, he just announced that he was asexual. And, of course, we were in mixed company and people who were, we were acquaintances, so nobody pressed him any further. I wanted to. I mean, I just didn't get it. I just don't. It's very difficult for me to relate to this in any way. I'm not, prejudicial against him. I just can't wrap my head around it. I wanted to ask him, and I'll ask you. You mean you don't have a sex drive? I mean, you don't form kind of romantic relationships. You don't have. Do you masturbate? I didn't want to ask him that stuff. In a group, and I never. And there was a couple other times over a period of 4 or 5 years where he would also mention it. Just as an aside, he would just say, "Well, of course, I don't want to have sex with anybody." And then we'd just, because every now and then sex would come up, and he would just always mention that as a caveat. that's where he is. So I was just wondering what the nature of this was. And I hesitate to say cause, because then that infers some pathology or something, which I don't mean to. I don't mean to do that. So I just where is that? What's going on here anyway? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, well, I'm not ace myself, but I guess I'll go ahead and jump in here and say that I honestly have the same bafflement oftentimes when I am talking to folks that tell me that they don't exercise. It's one thing to tell me I have a hard time making time for exercise, or it's just difficult to get motivated, because I relate to that. That makes all the sense in the world to me. But when somebody tells me that they get no pleasure out of going for a jog, that they have no interest in lifting weights or these different things, there's a very real part of me that is just like, what? How? Why? Not because there's something like morally superior about the way I'm spending my mornings a couple days a week or anything else, but just because I desperately, desperately need that release. I desperately need the opportunity to strap on some sneakers. And if I get busy or get stressed out or don't make time or am having too much going on and I miss out on that, I stop being like the best version of myself. I feel a little bit messy. I feel a little bit disorganized. And I find my sexuality is often in kind of the same place. And yet I know tons of people that for whatever reason don't do any kind of regular exercise. I mean, maybe on occasion they'll find some opportunity to exercise every once in a while. And I think a lot of those things graph on to the asexual spectrum, because there are lots of folks that perhaps don't exercise on a regular basis, that perhaps only exercise every once in a while. Maybe they're really passionate or interested in it, and maybe they're not. And that's just kind of part of being a human being. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I kind of get that, except there isn't a strong drive to exercise like
there is in me, sincerely. No, I think that what we're talking about here is a little bit of the difference between your personal experience of your body and somebody else's experience of their body. And I don't mean to be difficult or to interrupt you, but I think you may experience a sex drive, and you may experience or not experience a strong drive to exercise. But I know that I do. And I have been told that in the future, my body may degrade, my body may shift or change. And certainly when I'm sick or when other things are going on, I feel a decrease in that desire and that drive. But when I am at my best, when I'm at my happiest, I know that I'm out jogging a couple of days every week. And I don't know that that's an entirely different way of experiencing things.
I completely agree with you. I'm 73 years old, and I exercise every day from 90 minutes to 2 hours. So I get that, and I agree. And I think basically the reason that people who don't exercise, just haven't done it. They haven't gotten into that routine. It does take a little self-discipline to get into an exercise routine. But then,
and it may not be a perfect metaphor, and I definitely don't want to dismiss that, but I know plenty of people that just don't necessarily have that same interest or that same desire in physical exertion. And I don't necessarily know that it's about a lack of opportunity.
No, it's just that they haven't done it. I just think that they haven't. They just haven't. I think most people, once they get into regular, mediocre, not crazy. You don't have to be a long distance runner or anything, or run marathons. But that doctors have long said that if exercise could be shrunken into a pill or a capsule, it'd be the most widely prescribed medication on earth. Because of all the benefits it does. And once people start realizing those benefits, which I did. I was a very unathletic little boy. I was just a doughy, I look like a manatee. And then once I started exercising, it just feeds off itself. It does everything for you physically, mentally.
Bill.
You know.
Hey, Bill, I'm going to cut in here real quick just because we want to keep the show on topic and we're coming up to the end of the episode. I think, honestly, the one thing I want to say to you is kudos for finding the right venue for having this conversation, right? And knowing, oh, I don't want to put this person on the spot just because they identify as asexual. I don't want to interrogate them in front of acquaintances. I'm going to go to a place where they might have, answers to be more well equipped. So kudos to you on finding the right venue for this conversation. I love that. I do want to continue this conversation though at some point. So make sure to call back a little bit, a little earlier next time, and we will make sure to jump in with you right away if we see that you've called back.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thanks so much, Bill. Have a good rest of your night.
And I'll just kind of quickly point you towards the episode we did earlier in the summer with Misokist. And definitely say again that I don't speak for the asexual community. I recognize that it's a imperfect metaphor, but I just have had too many conversations with too many people. It's one of the, I don't know about you, Billy, but it's one of the questions I always ask when I'm meeting a new client. What is your exercise regimen like, if any? And people are all over the spectrum as to whether they do it because they love it, do it because they feel they need to, or whatever else. And maybe it does increase the more you do it. I think sex can be like that to an extent, but also it's not necessarily something that everybody's going to be driven towards.
Honestly, I kind of loved your analogy because it does correlate very much between my sex drive and my drive to exercise. It's like in the right conditions, like if I have a routine and a place I like to go and like I'm in the zone, absolutely. If you come up to me in the middle of like watching a TV show, like, hey, you want to go exercise? No.
Fuck no. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
I know we're No, please, Billy, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just like, with exercise, it was just always seen as a chore for me. And the Coast Guard is like, okay, we're going to run this much today. Like, okay. And it's because I had to run it. It's like, fine, I'll run my push-ups. I'll do my squats. I'll do all this other stuff. To me, it's just a chore. I did it for years and years and years, every single day. And it's just like, I know there's people that get the runner's high. I've never experienced that. I'm like, yeah, kind of jealous of it that you can get a high from it. But I mean, I think it's worth noting just very quickly as we're trying to wrap up, Billy, that you had what, 5 years of military service and were expected to exercise pretty well every day at a fairly intense level. And it doesn't quite click for you. It's not the biological urge that you're driven by. Yeah.
No.
Well, I mean, I know that I need to do it, and I used to be in a good routine, but it's been a while.
Fair to say. Very quickly, Billy, I guess I just wanted to kind of ask if there were any particular resources you wanted to point people towards, any particular podcasts or YouTubers or books or recommendations, maybe types of professionals, or really just anybody who would maybe like to take the next step in kind of coaching their way through a like healthier, more appealing voice for themselves.
Yeah, I think if you can go on, there's a few different ones, and I've listened to a few different ones over time, and it seems like they all kind of have a lot of the same kind of exercises as far as doing different things with kind of preparing, getting that voice up in pitch and all these other different things. So I haven't really found anything that I would be afraid of. If you go on ahead and do kind of a search with trans voice work, I haven't seen anything that's throwing any kind of where I'm any concerns. For the most part, it's just, like I said, I think the key thing is each one had a different way of explaining virtually the same thing. So I think there's been some really good stuff with that. I did pick up a book that I end up reading through, and it's actually pretty good. And it's got, and I do like the fact it also has some vocal exercises for people that are going from female to male or want a lower voice in their non-binary identity, which I think was pretty cool. Also, there's a little bit different exercise in doing that as well. And it's one weird trick, and it's Liz Jackson Hearns. And I like it because they did consult an SLP professional, and it's a so they're up in Chicago. She's up in Chicago, and basically it's she runs singing training, and she specializes with trans people. So she's got like a trans choir and all this other stuff. So I feel that it's pretty good. And like I said, the simple fact that she also talked to a pathologist to get to make sure that's like, okay, these exercises are good. And it does a good job of explaining it. So I do like that. And I do like the fact that they kind of remove a lot of the clinical descriptions of some reflex terminology, and really kind of giving you the idea of the anatomy of your vocal tract. I think that's really good, but in a more simplified version, instead of the textbooks that are normally for SLPs are very clinical, very dry. I think they do a really good job of just doing nice overarching explanation so the average person can understand like what exactly this is without having to also have another dictionary to figure out like what's this again, like, to kind of figure that out, because it gets a little complicated.
Yeah. Well, I'll make sure to put the details for that, as well as a collection of great YouTube videos and other resources in the show notes for this episode, as well as your links. Where can people find you, Billie?
Okay, so right now I've just got a website up and going, so it's a bit bare. It's it's Queer Counseling of Texas. No, Texas Queer Counseling. Sorry, Texas Queer Counseling is where I'm at. I'm planning on doing some videos on more LGBT stuff. Also, want to get into some social justice. There's a few different things that I want to kind of get in the history of different topics. I want to do some short video with that, so I'm hoping that can kind of build up over time. So that's the process right now.
Okay, well, great. We'll make sure to have those links where people can find them in the show notes. And before we go, though, I want to make sure to thank our incredible crew for helping us put all of this together. We have been struggling with all of our tech issues throughout the night, and y'all make us look so much better than we are in helping to manage and put those things together. So thank y'all so much for your patience and just making the trains run on time. We thank you so much for all your help.
All right.
Well, thank you, Billie. Thank you, crew, and V, of course. Otherwise, I suppose it's a good moment to encourage everybody out there to go out and give themselves a big ol' orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.